Sorry.
Thank you, Lascan Corda. Minister, seaweed as a resource has been available to communities living along the coast for many years. It has recently caught the attention of the government as Udas na Gaeltachta has wanted to sell its seaweed processing plant to a Canadian company. In recent times, there has become a lot of focus on harvesting then when the Canadians were happy to buy the plant, provided that they could have access to the resource growing along the coast. And then the resource that had been left to the coastal communities to look after had now all of a sudden a commercial value. So now it had to be taken from the local communities to be made available to the Canadians and to any company that it would have the interest of making money at their heart. They certainly do not have the interest of the local community at heart, except where they can help them to make a profit. So the purpose of the PMB today is to try and put the local community and harvester at the heart of the matter, rather than the operations of private companies. Never had the residents of the Western Seaboard thought that their harvesting of seaweed would be of interest to multinational companies. That has led to the situation they are now going to be sacrificed in order that companies can have unfettered access to the resource. Instead of finding a solution that meets the needs of the community that harvests the seaweed and the companies that want to benefit from the product that they harvest, the government wants to give the resource to the companies in its entirety. For the last number of years, the issuing of licences to companies has been in limbo because the government has discovered that many people living along the Western Seaboard have the right to harvest seaweed in the land registry documents for their property, and this makes the transfer of that right to seaweed companies difficult for the moment. Our motion today calls for the publication of a national strategy that would look at the potential of the seaweed industry, focusing particularly on the harvesters and the need to benefit local rural communities. Suspending of the granting of licences pending the publication of the strategy, and the moving of the licensing procedure to the Department of Agriculture that has responsibility for the marine. And also to ensure that traditional harvesters are looked after and are protected in any new regime. Some people might wonder why move it to the Department of Agriculture, but that is simply because the Department of Marine is already in there. It is vitally important for the future that we have one department that deals with marine matters. And the reality is that under this government, we won't have a department with responsibility solely for the marine. To highlight the futility of the current situation, the Marine Coordination Group, which has looked after marine matters for the last number of years, has 9 government departments sitting on it, plus the Attorney General. It may as well be the Cabinet. Some people would see this as a sign of the importance that the resource has, but it is in the Irish government circles a way of ensuring that nothing happens, because no one will take ownership and drive the group. It would also be argued that because of environmental conditions attached to harvesting seaweed, individuals will not be able to apply because the cost is too much for them, and that only companies would have the necessary resources to apply for a licence as a result. But I believe this can be done without imposing costs on the individual harvester. The state can adopt the same strategy that has been used in Natura Bays, where the state itself carries out the environmental surveys and sets the conservation objectives, and then the harvester shows how they can apply them. This is rather than having the harvester carry out all the studies. And this is more environmentally sound as well, because actually the state takes responsibility for the protection of the environment rather than the harvester. In reality, harvesting of seaweed in the natural way that is done in Ireland is similar to farming and cutting hay, so what is the environmental impact of that? In fact, traditional harvesters manually cut the seaweed, which is more sustainable for the resource than companies using mechanical extraction methods. The government response to our motion is interesting. They are trying to paddle both canoes, but it can be seen that they are coming down on the side of the companies. And should we be surprised, really, when we look, as Deputy Connolly has outlined, in relation to our oil and gas and our fishing, that the government would come down on the side of the companies? They recognise both the role of traditional harvesters and companies in the seaweed sector, and the Minister of State said he is working to bring clarity to the issue of companies and harvesters in the harvesting of seaweed. And this would not have arisen until companies wanted to get control of the resource themselves, and now the government is intending to make everything okay for them. Indeed, and when we see that the company actually uses a system of harvesting that has a greater impact on the growing of seaweed, it would make you wonder what they're at. Is it about protecting a resource for the future, or making a resource available to private companies to do with as they like? Is it okay for local communities to work for the company at their whim, harvesting their resource, or should the company have to build a relationship with the community in order that they will make their resource available to that company? That might seem a subtle difference, but I believe it is very important, because it comes down to where the ownership of the resource lies and who has to be worked with in order to use that resource. The state has a duty to manage the resource on behalf of the people, and that includes the people who harvest it. Multinational companies have the right to negotiate for the use of the resource, respecting the rights of the community and the state. If they make an agreeable deal, then so be it. But the power stays with us, and that is what is vitally important, and that's what has to be reflected at all stages. The use of seaweed when it is harvested is vitally important for rural communities as well, as I believe.